Hello, I'm Dana Hart. My specialty is neurogenetics with an emphasis on the neurotransmitter oxytocin. I'm going to change gears a little bit in this video and offer slides to help you follow along with the information I'm presenting. The first thing to know about this gene is that the people who study it use the exact descriptions to explain what's happening with it. While I personally like to refer to it as the empathy gene, the official name is OXTR rs53576, and the variations will be called homozygous for G, heterozygous for G, and homozygous for A. In order to develop some shorthand in communicating about this gene, I call the homozygous G condition the empathy gene, which is just the standard version of the oxytocin receptor gene. The mutation in this case would actually be something like the warrior gene, but in general I like to refer to the state of having the standard gene instead of the mutation. Because neurogenetics is a complicated field, each of these slides will have things to unpack. People with a standard knowledge of science in our society are often not well educated about these more advanced terms, so I will explain each phrase thoroughly as I go along. On this first slide, I open with the abbreviation SNP, which in genetics means single nucleotide polymorphism, and we pronounce it as SNP. This is when one single letter of the genetic code has been changed to a different letter. The SNP I will be talking about is a change that has happened on the oxytocin receptor gene, and the exact location is stated by the RS of the gene, in this case, rs53576. This slide shows a graph from an article which measured empathy in people and grouped them based on which version of the gene they had. On the left is the group with 2 copies of the mutated gene, or AA. The middle group has just 1 copy of the mutated gene, and the group on the right had 2 normal copies of the gene, so they are labeled the GG group. As you can see from the graph, the AA group had the lowest score on the test given in this experiment, something called the IRI on this graphic. Because of results like this, we generally don't think of this mutation as dominant or recessive, but it appears to be somewhat dose-dependent instead. Carrying just 1 mutated copy would mean half of the oxytocin receptors are affected, so the reduction in empathy and other symptoms are reduced but not totally diminished in a way that we would expect if the gene was fully dominant. The next thing I'm going to discuss is how we as scientists measure the effects of this gene. Empathy is a complex behavior defined by an ability to understand the inner workings of others by outside cues such as facial expressions or tone of voice. Having accurate measures of empathy are important because here in the United States, most people don't want to admit to being unempathetic and may claim to be good at this ability even when they actually respond to testing in the low range. This slide has the first method of testing for empathy, self-reporting. This is measured using a questionnaire which someone fills out by themselves about themselves. In the description of the video, I will be leaving links to some of these empathy tests so that you may take them yourself and see exactly the type of questions that are asked. In the last slide, we looked at some results from a test called the IRI, which is the Interpersonal Reactivity Index. I think of this sort of testing as possibly the least accurate, since the person is free to answer the questions inaccurately. In the United States, people generally want to be known as empathetic and may overestimate their own ability on self-reporting tests such as these. The next way empathy is measured are tests of ability. The most widely used test in this case is called the Reading the Mind in the Eyes test. This test shows pictures and offers possible descriptions of the person in the photo's mental state. This test tends to be a better measure of a person's empathetic abilities due to the inability to cheat or simply guess at the answers. The next 2 methods of finding out what the empathy gene is actually doing are physiological in nature and therefore considered some of the best ways to measure those differences. Some experiments have taken place where actual brain scans are performed on the participants while they are asked to do certain tasks. This study showed differences in both brain volume and brain function that depended on the person's version of the rs53576 allele. The top graphic compares differences in the size of the hippocampus, showing more neurons present in people with the GG genotype. The second graphic shows differences in the use of a part of the brain that's already known to be used when neurons that use oxytocin contemplate faces. When people have a normally functioning oxytocin system, the presence of oxytocin tends to regulate the amygdala, which is usually thought of as the fear center of the brain. It's thought that oxytocin tamps down fear so that social interaction can occur when someone recognizes a face. As this graph shows, people with the GG version of rs53576 showed engagement of the amygdala while performing empathy-related tasks, while those with 1 or 2 A alleles had much less activation in this brain area. The final methods I will discuss, which can be used to measure differences in empathy, are also physiological in nature and therefore unlikely to be faked. Oxytocin is known to decrease the stress hormone cortisol, calming people down and helping them recover after stressful situations. This hormone can be measured in the blood before and after a task. The graphic here was reporting results of measuring the participants' blood pressure. The column on the left shows the results of the people with the GG genotype. Their blood pressure rose as they were exposed to a social stressor, with almost opposite effects in people with the A mutations. These more physical measurements make experiments more compelling because, unlike self-reporting, the actual differences are outside the realm of opinion. Neurogenetics focuses on biological causes for behavior. And now to wrap up how this data might be significant, I'm going to bring it back to the much older field of psychology. In psychology, people are diagnosed with disorders when their behavior seems to be outside the norm of the society around them. The lack of empathy, which is one of the main effects of the mutation, rs53576, is one of the main symptoms of a disorder called narcissistic personality disorder. This mutation may also be associated with autism, especially when it is combined with other mutations that affect brain systems. In Western culture, there is currently a widespread interest in narcissism, with many counselors and life coaching channels focused on the disorder. When a person with a normally functioning oxytocin system enters a relationship with someone suffering from lack of empathy, the result can feel emotionally abusive and cause harm to the empathetic person. Many studies showed links to mental illness in people who have the GG genotype, which mainly increases depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. This falls in line with what some psychologists are teaching regarding CPTSD, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I only found one article incorporating trauma, but it did show that in their testing, the people with the GG genotype had higher levels of depression and PTSD, in this case after experiencing the aftermath of a devastating earthquake. In the West, the same counselors who teach about narcissistic abuse often talk about the effect of this abuse on the empathetic partners, who develop CPTSD due to ongoing abuse in their environment. The final thing I'd like to discuss in this video is how people know which version of the gene they have. The genetics tests that are done in labs target the particular gene and aren't the type of whole genome tests you might have done, like 23andMe. In the future, this SNP might be included as one of the genes that are tested for in these broad tests, but at this point, you can't just go get tested unless you participate in one of these trials at these labs that are doing this. The alternative to actually having a DNA test is to take these tests of empathy, which are available. In the description of this video, I'm going to include some links to online tests you can take to tell where you fall in your empathetic ability. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you, and please watch for more videos in the future. Goodbye.